Hey everybody, it's Skye. Thanks for joining me. I'm here with a new friend of mine, Ross King, and we're going to talk about his background a little bit, how we met, and a new song that he's releasing. So Ross, let's just bring everybody up to speed. You and I met just a few weeks ago at a conference in Pennsylvania. The Together Called, is that the right? I always get it backwards.
No, that's
Together right. Together Called conference, where I was a speaker and you were the worship leader, and we had not, I don't think, ever met prior to that, but had some great conversations. Talk a little bit about your involvement in that conference, why you were there.
Yeah, Together Called it's a marriage retreat for adoptive couples, so couples that have adopted children, and we've been doing it for about 6 years, leading worship at it. My wife and I, we have 4 adopted kids, and so it's just a really great time, because a lot of times, these sorts of conferences, especially for the adoptive families, are very like, we're talking about adoption. Maybe we're bringing our kids. It's a whole deal. And this is meant to be like, hey, if you've been through difficulty or just the adoption journey is difficult, here's a place where you can go and speak candidly with other people who really get it, who really have experienced some of these things. And we can share hard stories. We can it can be kind of a gallows humor thing too, like where we're able to sort of be honest and make jokes, and no one's like, "What did you say?" It's like, it's a really wonderful, refreshing kind of a time. And so, yeah, I've been doing that. My wife, I've been doing it for years.
And it was really an unusual environment for me to be in because, first of all, I'm not an adoptive parent. And then secondly, I have made it a policy, honestly, not to build a ministry on marriage or parenting. So I don't do marriage retreats. I don't do parenting advice. I don't do any of that. But my wife, Amanda, and I went to this conference together, and they didn't want me speaking on those issues directly. So it was a good fit. But we connected with you and your wife, Stacy. You shared a lot of your story of adoption, and your story of being a songwriter, living in Nashville through these recent years, and the reality of the challenge of being sort of in the Bible Belt during the upheaval of the Trump years. And you've listened to the Holy Post, that we resonate with a lot of those things. Talk a little bit about how you've changed over the last number of years, or how your perspective has changed as someone in the Christian music industry and as an adoptive parent, and just what impact have these years had on you?
Oh, yeah, and we don't have enough time, right? But
sure, yeah.
I was a Christian, Republican, Southern Baptist kid in the South. That's how I grew up, and came up around Christian music, and all the stuff that most of the cliches you would apply to all the things I just said were my life, and I would have been a person who would have said slavery was about states' rights, and I would have been the kind of person who, when you mentioned MLK, what would have come to my mind pretty quickly would have been he cheated on his wife, and that made him an invalid. I'd been told all those things. It wasn't so much that I was like passionate about those things. That's just kind of how I was raised. And so with everything from adoption, which we have 4, and they're sort of varying ethnic backgrounds, and our 2 oldest boys are biracial, half black, half white. So they raising them has done some things, but that, and then the Trump years, and just digging deeper into what I feel like the scriptures say about the kingdom of God with relation to how a lot of these sort of party line views get siloed. It just started, I'm sure you get it. It just started getting completely upended, and it wasn't like I was on some search to become. I wasn't mad at my past. I wasn't like, oh, I got to swing the other direction. I just started getting uncomfortable with a lot of what was going on. And at the same time, I've always been kind of a Rich Mullins-y, Keith Greenish sort of a, poke at the bear kind of a songwriter who didn't really feel like I fit that well in the Nashville thing, but wanted to do it and wanted to make royalty checks and wanted to have bigger impact than my personal singer-songwriter career could make. So I tried to get into CCM and all that, but felt weird there too, for a variety of reasons. And we don't have to pick on, when I say CCM, I assume that, contemporary Christian music. I'm not here to pick on that, but it's kind of we all know, it's a very sanitized, anesthetized kind of a genre.
Okay, well, let's not pick on that, but let's talk about it a little bit more.
This is on you, Skye. This is on you.
It's totally on me. I mean, you mentioned Keith Green, and who else did you mention?
Rich Mullins.
Rich Mullins, of course. I have a book about Rich Mullins sitting right here on my desk. There is a tradition going back to the 70s and 80s of Christian musicians writing somewhat prophetic, challenging songs, and not prophetic or challenging to the wider culture, but to the church, right? Asleep in the Light, that great song. Like, I mean, how relevant is that right now? But so how did we lose some of that? What happened to Christian music, popular Christian music, where it shifted from this more edgy songwriting, self-reflective, even prophetic thing into, anesthesia, as you put it?
Yeah. I mean, I have my theories, and obviously I'm not going to know it all, but I can tell you what I think happened. I mean, there's a thing, if you listen to Christian radio at all, you will probably, I don't think it's as ubiquitous now, but for a long time you would hear this phrasing in their ads. Like if they were talking to their listeners and it was a commercial for the station kind of saying, hey, you should listen to our station, their little 15-second blurb would often say something like, always positive, always encouraging, always safe for the whole family, right? That was kind of their thing.
Right.
And I just have this theory that at some point, this is made up, and I think I even shared this with you when we were together, but I have this theory that at some point, two Christian record executives were at dinner with their wives, and the wives are talking about their husbands' jobs or whatever. And of course, I'm assuming it's men and women, whatever, but the wives were talking, and they were like, I love how you guys provide music that we can have our kids listen to in the back of the car, and they're safe to like not hear any sexual talk or any provocative language or whatever else. And my, sort of my made up fantasy theory is that these two guys kind of locked eyes and were like, Eureka, we just heard why this works. It works because kids can hear it, moms can hear it, people can ingest it sort of harmlessly, right? And if you go back maybe 15 years, there was that section of time where CCM, if you walked into a Christian bookstore, which was a thing still, you would see these little like end caps that would say, if you like Britney Spears, you'll like, and it would list somebody, right? And it was, and that was like a little trend that was like, let's figure out ways to tell people sonically, we're going to give you this sound, but from a lyrical content perspective, it's going to be a safer version of that.
Yeah, and part of me understands and even blesses that. And here's what I mean. Like, I have teenagers. I hear some of the songs that they and their friends play, and a lot of them are horrible. Like the profanity, the misogyny, it's gross, right? There's a lot of gross stuff out there in popular music. And so the instinct to say, oh, I want to be able to put a radio station on that my kids, I don't have to worry about those messages and content, and I want it to be quote unquote safe. I think that's a good instinct. But somewhere along the lines, this idea of safe shifted into comfortable.
Right.
Where, when I listen to Rich Mullins or Keith Green or some of those old songwriters, there's nothing profane or ungodly about what they're saying, but it can be really uncomfortable. Right. Because they're challenging their listeners. Right. And so somehow the CCM thing moved from, we want to make sure our families are safe when they listen to music, to we want to make sure everyone is comfortable when they listen to music. And there you lose that prophetic edge. You lose that challenge. And
I mean, I know you would agree with this because we've talked enough for me to know this is how you think too, but the idea that we could be protest music, that to me, that there ought to be a strong element, if you were to sort of say, well, CCM is this kind of thing, one of those categories ought to be, and it's got a lot of protest music. It's got a lot of, we're not going to take it, kind of biblically speaking, we are going to speak to power, we are going to be the prophetic voice who says, here's how the systems are, but guys, we can't bow to those systems. And I think we've lost that, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I have this theory. For people who don't know, I've been a sort of staff songwriter for a couple of pretty major Christian music publishers. Okay, so my job being to go into rooms with artists and try to write radio hits, and I'm not very good at it. Just honestly, I'm just okay at it. I've had it's just honest. Like someone could listen and be like, yeah, Ross isn't that good at this. I've done it for a long time, and I've got a lot of numbers. Like my bio looks good, but I don't have a bunch of like big hits, right? So So anyway, I had this whole like thought that like whenever you go in and do that, there's a ton of gatekeepers between that moment and it getting on the radio. And at every level, those gatekeepers are not just assessing quality or biblical truth or impact. They are assessing offense, potential offense, right? Or potential things that'll stop it, right? And so I have this like joke that I make when someone's trying to understand CCM. I will say, have you ever been to a church service where the preacher said something edgy, something in people's faces, kind of like a tough point? And afterwards, someone walks up to the preacher and says, hey, preacher, listen, I'm not offended by what you said, but there's probably some people here who are. Just want you to know that. I think that's what happens at every gatekeeper level in CCM, is a sense of, I'm not offended by this. I'm not offended by this. I'm pretty sure somebody will be, so let's like catch it now before it goes too far. And what's funny about that, Skye, is that you and I both know that people love church services where somebody gets in their face. They brag about it. Oh, that guy, he just read my mail. They love that stuff, right? So it is weird that musically we're that concerned about it.
There's a similar dynamic in Christian publishing. And without sharing too much detail, one of my books, I turned it in and the publisher loved it, thought it was great. And then they took issue and wanted me to change the dedication page, so who the book was dedicated to. And they said almost exactly what you just referenced. They said, listen, we don't have a problem with your dedication page, but we're worried that some book buyers will, and we just want to sell as many books as possible, and they might be offended by who you dedicated this book to.
Well, Skye, you can't dedicate books to Kamala Harris.
Oh, darn it.
You should have known that. You should have known that.
But it was a really bizarre interaction I had with the publisher where I was like, seriously? Like, you have no problem with the content, but the dedication page is what, and at the
Who
end,
reads the dedication page?
I know, but I don't want to get into that story. But there is that sense of, it's an industry, and they're trying to appeal to as many consumers as possible, and so let's not offend or make anyone uncomfortable. Yeah,
right.
Which is a great introduction to your new song. So before we play a clip of this new composition you've put together, which is definitely in that more prophetic songwriting tradition, share a little bit of the background. What inspired you to write this song?
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to name drop because it involves a name drop. Well, I was having a conversation. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who I love, and if he ever hears this, I want him to hear that I love him, and he's a great guy, great friend of mine. But we disagree politically, and he had posted something on one of the socials about it was a meme or something, and it was woke Jesus, and it was this sort of picture of Jesus, it's where they like have a picture of Jesus doing something, and then they put these bubbles of what he would say, and it's something like Jesus doesn't want you to repent, and it wasn't, not only was it not funny, it just was silly and it wasn't helpful. And you and I have talked, but I'm kind of like a history and racial history nerd, so I know a lot about the etymology of the word woke, and so I get over nerdy about stuff like that. So I just messaged him and said, hey, this isn't helping anybody. You're not going to convince anybody. And actually, you want to talk about the word woke? We can get into that. I can help you with some of that, with the co-opting of that word by the right and all that. And so we're just kind of, very peacefully going back and forth. And he finally says, I remember he typed, Ross, I've taken a side, period. And I just thought, I was like so taken aback. I don't even know what to really do with that. Like, do I push? And I think I pushed a little bit like, well, how do you know what side? And, it didn't go real far because I thought this is a deep hole of clear disagreement between he and I about the way you even verbalize that sort of thing. So I follow a lot of people that you guys like And Campaign and Truth Over Tribe, all these folks who are kind of lifting up the sort of righteous, non-side taking thing. And I was reposting something about that a few days later. And Ann Voskamp, who's this great author, she's become a friend of mine weirdly through, I read a lot about depression and anxiety and the gospel, and she got connected to a song of mine and liked it. So we started talking. So I posted something about the Ann Campaign or something like that, the kind of a politically homeless thing. And she responded to it. And so we start talking. And I tell her that story about the friend. And I said, Ross, I've taken a side. And she says, just offhandedly, because she's Ann Voskamp, she says, the only side I take is a side that was pierced for me. And of course, I'm like, well, good grief, that's already half a song right there.
That's poetry right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like she just sort of burped that out. I'm like, this is incredible. So I just started thinking about this idea that I'm holding onto a hand that's got holes in it, and I'm bowing at feet that are attached to the cross, and I'm taking the side of this person who was like, his side was pierced, and I just love this whole idea of like, so the song speaks to kind of whatever voices would recruit us into, you better take a side here, because, it's kind of that fear mongering and, that lesser of two evils thing where you say, if we let them win, then all of us lose. And so it just speaks to a lot of that. And it's, at this point in my career, the age I am and kind of where I am with my small group of fans, I can risk saying weird stuff like this, knowing that I'm not going to take over the world with my songs, but I've kind of like earned the right with my fans to say these kind of wackier things. So yeah,
well,
I don't know if that answers.
With that introduction, let's pause for a second and let everyone listen to a clip of the new song. And the title is "The Only Side I Take." Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Only Side. Okay, so here's a brief glimpse of "The Only Side I Take" by Ross King.
You can try to recruit me, put the fear in my news feed, tell me all that I'm losing if I let the wrong side win. You can try to persuade me to hate the ones who hate me. Promise me you can save me if I join the tribe you're in. But I should probably warn you that would be a waste of time. I'm already taken, I cannot take your side. The hand I hold is a hand with a hole in the shape of a 9-inch spike. And I bow at the feet that were bound to a tree by love that redeemed my life. Can't pledge my loyalty to you, it's already been promised to the side that was pierced by a spear for my sake. And that's the only side I take.
Okay, hopefully that gave everyone a taste. Before we talk more about it, if someone's going, oh my gosh, I want to hear the whole thing or I want to get that song, what's the best place people can go to get the song?
I mean, these days, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, however you engage your streaming music. I'm not going to even pretend like people want to buy things. But yeah, I mean, it's just look up Ross King, Only Side I Take. And hopefully, whenever this airs, it'll be at the top of my list of most played songs. But
there you go.
It should be easy to find.
Okay, there's a lyric in here that when you first sent this to me a couple weeks ago, I had to keep backing up and re-listening to this one part. And in it, you say, "You can try to recruit me, put the fear in my news feed, tell me all that I'm losing if I let the wrong side win. You can try to persuade me to hate the ones who hate me. Promise me you can save me if I join the tribe you're in." What a perfect summary of the political idolatry that is everywhere these days. And it's all rooted in fear. Hate the people who hate me, put fear in my newsfeed, try to recruit me. Oh my gosh. Like you just, in a few brief lyrics, captured the spirit of our age. And that doesn't happen too often anymore.
Oh, thank you. I've spent plenty of time blowing all that and doing it wrong. So that's probably part of it, just watching. And I, my parents have both passed, but my mom's was in a generation of people who like her kind of group of friends was just so seemed to be driven by fear and so worried, that even down to where I know my mom occasionally worried that my influence in the middle she was scared that I was influencing people away from extremes,
Well, I mean, isn't our purpose here to influence people toward deeper communion with Christ and greater reflection of his character? I don't see how that could be a bad
look,
thing.
we don't have time to do this, and I'm sure you guys have done plenty of this on the podcast. I've heard you do it. But this whole idea that like one side has fully encapsulated it. I mean, isn't it just shocking to you that people actually believe that? Like that you think, these people who've spent their lives pursuing power and influence and doing these sort of machinations, behind the scenes, that they're really going to, at the end of the day, be like, well, I'm going to lose a lot of money and a lot of influence if I say this, but I'm just going to do it. like, and I tell my friends all the time, if you follow people who would lose their job if they change their mind, just be careful.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. And the other thing that I'm sure you've experienced a ton of, and this goes back to the origin of the song with that friend of yours saying, I've chosen a side, period,
Right.
is when you don't choose a side or when you object to something from one side, you're automatically accused of being in league with the other side. So case in point, just yesterday I had posted something on Twitter. There's a story going around about Texas is trying to pass a law that would require the 10 Commandments to be posted in every public school classroom. And I posted some stuff kind of disagreeing with this idea. And somebody came out and said, well, you must be then in favor of LGBTQ propaganda being posted. And so I'm like, well, yeah. And I said, no, I'm in favor of like posters of the presidents and math problems and like, the parts of grammar being like I'm in favor of educational posters in our schools, not this other. But it just because I wasn't supporting the 10 Commandments poster, I must be in support of the. And my goodness, it's so hard to not be sucked into this stuff.
I remember maybe a couple of years ago, George Conway is Kellyanne Conway's husband. Yeah. He was a never Trumper, and she of course worked for Trump and all that. So he posted something. When one of those Supreme Court justices was confirmed, I think it was Barrett. He said, "She's a good choice. I think she's a good choice." Whether or not you and I agree, but she was just saying that, and all these people were like, "I knew you were lying all along. You were really a right wing conservative." And he's like, "I've been a conservative my whole life.
Right.
I just don't like Trump." And you guys think that means I have to always side with the left, and I'm actually approving this judge. And it was just the funniest thing. Like, who thinks George Conway's a leftist? I mean, it's crazy, or Kinzinger or Liz Cheney, all these folks. It's just crazy, like how you're right, any sort of sign that I'm not fully on board, party line, we can't lose any ground, and I just can't live like that.
And that's part of the reason I love your song. I mean, you probably are acutely aware as a songwriter that an awful lot of our theology in the American church is not coming from our engagement directly with Scripture. It's not even coming from engagement with theology or historical writings of the church. It's coming from the songs we sing. And that maybe has always been the case, right? The classic hymns, and even in the New Testament, there are songs that are recorded there that are kind of liturgical. And it's always been the way of God's people, going back to the Psalms, to communicate deep truths through music. And going back to the original conversation here, when we don't have prophetic music in the white evangelical church anymore, when we're not producing that kind of stuff, it shouldn't be surprising that our theology is weak. And that's one of the reasons I was so grateful for this song. I felt like here's a songwriter taking a contemporary issue and putting a profoundly biblical lens on it to say we're not to be politically tribal, we're to be aligned and give our loyalty to Christ above everyone else. And thank you for writing lyrics and putting a melody to it that like can communicate that deep truth, because you and I could say it on a podcast all day long, or Phil and I could say that stuff, but until you put it to music, it doesn't resonate in the soul of the church. So I'm hoping that you and others, those who have ears, let them hear.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you saying that so much, because it's basically, as I've gotten a little older and realized, at some point in your life, you're like, oh, I'm not going to, be famous, or whatever your original dreams were, whatever your silly dreams were as an early artist, you just kind of realize, oh, this isn't my path. But I have these ways I think, and I have these few people who seem to always engage it. And, and I'm occasionally losing some of those folks, here and there, and I'm gaining other people. But I do believe that, like, music has impacted me my whole life. And I think about even songs I didn't like as a kid, maybe come back to me now, and they've sort of spoken down deep in places that are still down there, and I just want to keep doing that. And I feel like there's a weird kind of grace that sort of accompanies music that's got a prophetic bent, because it's, there's that emotional element, spoonful of sugar kind of element to it, right?
Yeah.
That's allowing people to hear it in ways that if you just said it to them, it wouldn't be quite the same. And so, that's what I'm here to do, at least job-wise, for as long as I can pay the bills doing it.
So before we wrap up, any any reports on how the song's been received from your community or from the wider CCM community? And what do you envision as your future as a songwriter given the current dynamics of the CCM industry?
Yeah, that's great. Well, as of the time of this recording, it's coming out tomorrow. So
right.
I've showed it to friends, and most of them, I even showed it to the guy who we talked about. I didn't tell him that it was from our conversation, so at some point I have to tell him. And he was like, "This is really good," which was great. I was like so happy to hear that. But no, I think, look, I have, for better or for worse, I have kind of been paving the way to where people expect me to do weird things with my artist career. Because again, I have these kind of two jobs where I'm writing for other people, and that stuff's more, CCM approved or whatever. And then I write my own stuff kind of almost as a response to, or, I get to scratch the itch I didn't get to scratch in that writing session, right? And so I've got a certain, whatever reputation I have, it is, Ross is going to do these kinds of things, and so that's been really good for me because it's not like I'm shocking people. But I do my current thing. I spent about 4 or 5 years writing a lot about mental health because I felt like Christians weren't doing a good job of that, and I feel like that's catching up. But now I feel like we are in such a tribal, angry, and also, like you said, kind of a weirdly. I don't want to say biblically ignorant because that sounds real like Theo bro, but there's a thing where we're not really interested in looking at what the Bible says about something, right?
Right.
We've just already decided, right? And so I'm trying to graciously step into those spaces and say, I have this song coming out after this one called Like Jesus, and it's all about how I want to be like Jesus in this moment and in this moment, but not so much in this moment. I want to be like Jesus here, but not when he does this. Like sort of an honest confession of, man, these are moments when being like Jesus isn't that great. Right? Like there's a line that says, I want to be like him when he tells the soldiers, I am he, and they all fall down. But I don't really want to be like him a minute later when he surrenders himself to them, that kind of thing, Or I want to be like him when he says, come to me if you're weary. I don't like him as much whenever he says, forgive your friend 77 times, whatever. So, but that kind of I want to push myself and others to think deeply, even as I'm still processing it, right? Some of this stuff I haven't got it figured out, but I'm processing these kind of full view of Jesus as much as I can get it, right? With intellectual honesty, which, as you and I both agree, intellectual honesty is kind of absent in a lot of this stuff. So
it totally is. But that's the kind of songwriting. When I was really young in my faith, late in my high school years, early in college, it was those kinds of songs that motivated me. It was right. The Mullins and the Greens and even Michael Card and others who wrote biblically rich content, but were also really honest about
right.
the struggle of it. They had a prophetic edge at times, but man, I wish we had that more. And thank you for keeping that alive and doing it so well.
Let me say one more thing about what you just said, because this is interesting to me, and you can cut it later if it's not interesting to you. But all the people that we usually mention in these contexts fit in a genre of folk.
Right.
And one of the things that's so interesting to me is how the advent of hip hop in the last 30 years has brought this other kind of protest music into the scene. And of course, hip hop, like jazz and like the blues, influences all the other music because our art is always the most influenced by our marginalized cultures, right?
Totally.
And so now pop has these hooky melodies that you and I may or may not like, but its pop is actually extremely honest now. It's gotten really honest, and there's this kind of flipping musicology flipping where when I was a kid, country was honest and pop was party music, and now country's party music and pop is honest. And so part of my goal in all this is to take the skills I've learned as a writer of mainstream music and don't make all these songs just like navel-gazing folk songs, but to give them energy and to give them like hooks, which is kind of counterintuitive because it's working in pop. Like pop is actually speaking about mental health and politics and oppression and all this stuff. They're not always doing it well, but they're doing it. And for some reason, it's kind of gotten bolder. And I'm like, I want to do that, because that's taking all the best of both worlds. And I'm also I like music that isn't always super folksy and depressing, right?
Right. Well, it reminds me a little bit of Lecrae. I mean, he comes into the Christian music scene with hip hop and starts producing what is generally theologically informed hip hop music, and people
Yes.
love it, and white teenagers and youth groups eat it up. And then he starts getting prophetic and he starts challenging the comfort of that community, and he's cast out. So,
He's fascinating. And I know you guys did an interview with him a couple years ago, but he is fascinating to me.
Totally.
And his sort of coming out of like, okay, I'm going to tell you guys what happened when I got honest. I think that's just so powerful.
Well, and I think that whether you're talking about the new honesty that you see in pop music or the old honesty that used to be in folk music or country music, I think that should permeate Christian art. It should be honest, including uncomfortably honest. And that's, again, what this song does. And I hope there are more artists out there who are wrestling with faith, wrestling with God, struggling with what does it really mean to follow Jesus when it's not easy, and using different genres to communicate that honestly. Even, frankly, preaching as an art form, which is the one I'm closest to, or writing, like there's so much lack of honesty in the pulpit these days. And I don't mean just like, I'm not saying pastors are lying, but they're not revealing what they really think and what their real perspective is, because they're worried about getting canceled. They're worried about getting fired. They're worried about being cast out. So the more we can just cultivate honesty and allow scriptures to speak honestly through our art and people to speak honestly about what it means to be faithful in this moment, the better off we'll be. So maybe that's the lesson in all this, is the church just needs to be honest, and we need to free our artists to lead us in that way.
May it be so, Lord.
Yes, indeed. Ross, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your music. Thank you for your friendship and for sharing this background on this song with the Holy Post audience. And I hope...
Well, I will tell you, Skye, you know this, but I'm a nerd. Like I came up to you the first day we met, and I was super nervous about, because you were kind of a rock star to me. So I am totally honored to be a part of this thing, because I think the Holy Post is doing some of the best, just like what you're saying. It's setting up this sort of non-loyal, except to Jesus way, and this curious and uncomfortable and disarming kind of thing that we need so much more of that. So really grateful to be even a small part of it.
Well, thanks. And I mean, you just touched on what I love about doing the Holy Post, is it gives me the opportunity to meet so many fascinating people like yourself. And this little podcast becomes like a hub for those of us who want to connect and share this point of view. So Ross, thank you so much. And all of you who are listening to this, go check out Ross's song, his other music, and support artists like him and others who are producing really honest, Christ-centric messaging that the church needs today. Have a good one.
Thanks, buddy.